And why is this level not finished? Because you in the beginning you mentioned it's not
Mm,
totally finished. You have some more tweaks to do. So
yeah.
what's before and after? If you were to think about how you started the screenshot and what are the changes you want to do for the finished version?
Yeah. Yeah, so this screenshot specifically is from March, so it's like 5 months old at this point. The level is practically finished. Like I think we're going to be shutting things down soon as we're getting closer to ship. I guess some of the differences, like if you played the flight like a month ago, like you would have seen some more of my changes. But like I added an extra fill light in this area just because it was getting like a little dark and the exposure was like freaking out because like the sun's super bright and there's just no real bounce light in that area because there's metal. So like I added an extra point light there just to brighten that area up and not make the exposure like ramp up like to crazy amounts. Um, and like
That's
for
interesting that you mentioned exposure. Let's talk about that before you go deeper into the areas. The exposure, how does that work, and how do you deal with it in this particular project?
Yeah, so it's a value we can tweak just like in anything else. It was something that was set a little bit earlier, like pretty much before I got around to it. Like I never really messed around with exposure too much in any of the levels that I worked on currently, but for like some of the post launch stuff that is going to be something I'm going to work on. But we want to
Because
try
it's
to
not
keep
because you didn't because you don't have PBR based workflow, which means do you tweak it per level,
it's very
basically?
much per level. It's whatever the level needs. Like, as this map recharge, it's like it's an interior space with like windows and stuff where the light can pour through. So, in this area, like the exposure is going to ramp up more because of the sun. And then, like, if you go into like some of the back spaces, like this like back hallway or into like this area, that's like enclosed from the sun, the exposure is going to be a little less rampant.
So if you were to explain to the viewers, like how would you try and pass on the knowledge of understanding exposure control and exposure adjustment for your lightings in these kind of cases? Like what's the obviously the math behind it, or what's the thought process of doing that?
Mm. Yeah, so different projects have different, I guess, methods of doing it. Like you can always take exposure from like real world photography. Like I'm personally not too well versed in that, but you can get like real world exposures for like daytime, nighttime, sunset, whatever. Like different times of day have different types of exposures. Um, you could always just clamp the exposure so there's no auto exposure, which isn't really the best for gameplay. Like I think that is fine if you're just taking screenshots for like a portfolio piece, but if you're working in a game, you want that exposure. So like if you're in a darker room looking out into the sun, it gets super bright, and then when you get into the room, then it like settles back down. Like that's like a really cool effect.
Okay. And in this case, you have added those fill lights to deal with where the exposure goes out of control, basically.
Yeah, so like this corner, like right here, if you were standing like in the sun in like a couple seconds, you'll just see the exposure ramp up and it gets like super bright. So I just literally added like a point light right there just to get some like extra fill in, and it just like it keeps the exposure calm, if you will. It doesn't freak out. And I had to do that for like a couple different spaces.
Cool.